1 year ago, Jordan burnt Peterson's personal anti-establishment educational endeavor launched. Is it living up to its advertised promise of a, quote, higher education at 1% of the price yet? This video is made possible thanks to the continuing support of viewers, patrons on the different platforms, and PayPal pals like you. Thanks! Yes, dear viewer, time flies when the world is a chaos machine, and we're finding out just how dark our timeline can be. Part of that, apparently, includes Peterson trying to follow his own life advice and creatively but conservatively fix something he sees as corrupt and broken: the traditional higher educational system. For the history of the Peterson Academy, including when the idea seems to have first popped into his head, check out my review of the launch for this site. We shan't be rediscussing it today. Last little bit here before talking about the Academy. If you are new here, hi, I'm Cass, and I am a cognitive psychologist. PhD, no less. As such, I have done the full academic song and dance, both as a student and instructor. And that includes several years of teaching and a certificate in undergraduate education. So my experience in talking about getting people to learn things goes beyond the many, many hours just parked in a lecture hall as a student. For more cognitive psych insights, of course you can subscribe to me here. That is free. And I do still want that silver play button. Manifest, because that works. You can also check me out on Patreon. There is a sort of informal ramble series developing on implicit learning and knowledge, because I have a fair bit of explicit knowledge on the topic, as that's kind of my area of expertise. So aside from reminding you that I do have merch, fun mugs, and other shirts and things, I think that's everything to say before we get to the site today. To the credit of the Peterson Academy, the pre-buy-in site, so the one that you see before you give them any payment info, is far more functional today than it was at launch a year ago. This isn't something they've let stagnate. At the very start, we're met with the claim that this is, quote, higher education at 1% of the price. And I will have more to say about that later. Going through the checkmark list of claims here, this is available to anyone, assuming you have the $400 to throw at this every year and an internet connection and a computer. 4 new courses have indeed been added monthly. I don't seem to have it written down, but I want to say at launch their goal was 2 new additions every month, but at some point it got up to 4, so there's 1 every week. How long they can keep that pace? Hard to say. Maybe they'll be able to keep adding relevant and informative courses from mostly experts in their fields. Maybe at some point they'll have exhausted their network of connections willing to associate with this platform, and you still have things that they can spin up into a course. At time of writing, there are roughly 52,000 students enrolled. With the current price of $399 a year, this has generated north of $20 million. Even today, it says it's in beta, but prior to launch, there was the promotional early access price of $449, which went up to $499 at launch. And then in January, so a couple months later, the price went up to $599 for a year's access. But then in April, it dropped to the current price of $399 a year, thanks to some inflow of funds from undisclosed investors. They say there's an intellectually driven community, but having poked around the site, I'm a bit skeptical. The comments on course videos are similar in nature to friendly comments you'd see on a YouTube video, and in the general quad area, there's people promoting their personal brands and general, wow, this is so great posts. There are indeed 60 plus courses, as they now sit at 61. However, 19 of these are shorter than 8 hours according to their course descriptions. 22 are the advertised 8 hours, and the rest are longer. But even if we were to take the average, it's still a shy 7.95 hours, so not this 8 hours, 61 courses that's on the page. Although I don't think the handful of math courses includes any statistics, so this may be a claim beyond the Peterson Academy students' ability to test. And sure, attending the Peterson Academy won't cost you $200,000, a figure that seems to be more true for a 4-year private college degree than, say, an in-state public college. but the utility of the Peterson Academy yet to exist certificate or degree is arguably lower. When the site launched, most of the important information on the courses and instructors was paywalled, something I wasn't too pleased about, as it would be more difficult to ascertain if these courses would be worth the cost. As I said at the start of this section, points to them, this is no longer the case. You can get a good sense of what the course will cover and who the instructor is before logging in. As a couple examples, we can see what all Peterson's Sermon on the Mount class will cover. Surprising no one, tons of Bible stuff. There's also the Introduction to Applied Mathematics course. That's taught by a BYU math professor and will be a whirlwind trip through calculus. Continuing down, there's naturally an emphasis on the courses by the Academy's namesake. His courses also get the highest amount of engagement. Go figure. They're showing a bunch of random people from an assortment of universities, although mysteriously missing from this tray is BYU, the home institution of several of their course instructors. Quote, develop skills that AI can't replace. Except for the not really part, sure. I really don't see how these are developed in the current courses. Being told how to think critically is not the same as actually developing that skill. I'm going to assume the thought on conscientiousness is all the biblical studies somehow fostering that through osmosis. Writing hasn't been implemented in the courses yet, and writing random comments on videos or in the general forum are not structured writing assignments. Same for communication. Negotiation and leadership are similarly on the sidelines, but human motivations may be discussed in some of the psychology courses. So the basic summary for me here is a whole lot of nope. Skipping down a bit brings us to mention of the comprehension tests. In an improvement from last year, the quizzes and tests are functional now. Sort of. For the worst of this, the video comments on the math courses are full of people telling others how they need to type out their answer to be marked as correct by the AI graders. Because of course, these things are all AI powered, for better or worse. The social network aspect of the Academy is functional, as it was last year. And I have no comment about this cruise they're apparently working on. Finally, dropping down to the FAQ, we can revisit a couple of my big concerns from last year. They are still claiming, quote, a wide range of social science, business, humanities, and natural science topics. While I can say the situation has improved on the veracity of this claim, it's still a ways off from being accurate. The current courses. There were 18 courses on the site when they launched. And again, check out my review from a year ago for more detailed information on what they started off with. We are going to be focusing on big picture sorts of things here. Something I didn't do last year was really break down the subject area of those courses. But we can do that now and look at how things have changed. This figure is showing the number of courses by path. Roughly the discipline area of the courses, as it isn't totally clear what they're going to be calling these down the road. I tried to strike a specificity balance here. I didn't want these to be so broad that we lost the ability to meaningfully see what's going on, but also not so granular that we couldn't pick out trends. Each path has stacked bars for the launch and post-launch courses in blue and yellow respectively. Looking at just the launch courses in blue, there was a disproportionate focus on psychology at 5 courses and an absolute lack of math. Math has a stronger showing now with 4 courses, but there is still a strong psychology bias, now at 17 total, so it's almost a third of what's there. The discipline with the next highest representation is philosophy at 8, followed by history and economics, 6 each, then biology with 5. Breaking all of these into the 4 advertised topic groupings, they've got 7 business courses, which are mostly economics, and 21 in the humanities, mostly philosophy and history, with a smattering of other things. For simplicity, I lumped all of psychology and neuro into the social sciences, as much as it pained me to do so. Psychology is one of those disciplines that can go many different directions, especially depending on the local focus. At my undergrad, it was solidly in the College of Natural Sciences. That was also its home, where I went to grad school, despite the loud protestations of the counseling faculty, in part because it meant that the psychology undergrads had to take a science and some more math. The horror! However, some schools, like where I adjuncted, have it in the liberal arts college. Some will park it in humanities, and some it gets to be in its own little social sciences thing, presumably hanging out with like anthropology, sociology, and other of those things. It's a mess. So yeah, there are 21 social science courses, 17 of which are psych. One is Michael Shermer's Skepticism 101, and the rest are political science. Finally, there are 12 courses in the natural sciences. 5 are biology, 2 are related to introducing space, 1 is a nutrition course taught by a non-nutritionist, and the remaining 4 are math. And adding a note here that math can sometimes be split off from the natural sciences because it is different. And also, not that they have statistics yet, but I've seen statistics angrily divided off from math because there are enough differences between those fields, I guess. Academics tend to have strong opinions about where exactly their discipline should be housed. I am no exception. And there is another way we should look at the breakdown of these courses. How advanced they're intending them to be. Are they meant to be introductory, or are they something like a higher level course? Emphasis on like, because these are more similar to college seminars than proper educational courses, giving the breadth and depth of topics covered. This figure is similar to the last bar plot, with the discipline along the x-axis and the number of courses on the y. As shown here, there aren't a lot of basic level courses in green, but I should give a couple caveats before we continue. In an academic situation, you would want to see more of these higher level specialized courses than introductory ones. So the Peterson Academy isn't necessarily bad in this regard. However, for any discipline, there needs to be those foundational courses that get students oriented and competent in the basic information of that discipline, that teaches them the jargon and other vocabulary they need, the assumptions, the methods, just all of this stuff that they need to have in order to do the higher level courses. Instructors in higher level courses generally assume safely that students will have the foundational knowledge in place from the prerequisites they had to take to get to that higher level course. In 200 level courses, instructor might refresh some of the basic foundational stuff, especially if they know that maybe the intro professor doesn't always cover it the best or teaches it weird. You might refresh some of the stuff, but generally you hit the ground running and you don't look back because they should have that knowledge. It is hard for me to say that the intro classes here are doing any of that. And also, before we get back to the figure, I should add that I'm not including everything that had introductory in the title or considered itself an introductory course. So a couple examples here are an introduction to abnormal psychology and fundamentals of physiology. Both of those, in my experience, are higher level courses that assume you've had introductory psychology, research methods, and a bunch of basic biology before you get to physio. Working from left from right on this figure, our first intro course is Introduction to Nutrition by the journalist Max Lugavere. We can compare his lecture topics to what's generally covered in more traditional nutrition courses, like say those from Cornell's Nutritional Sciences program. Their intro-level course, Nutrition, Health, and Society, covers some of the same ground as Lugavere's. However, since it is a 3-credit-hour course, the ground they cover at Cornell will be in substantially more depth, as those credits denote 3 lecture hours per week for however long the semester is. Furthermore, many of Lugavere's topics are covered in the higher level courses at Cornell, like metabolism of nutrients in this 300 level course, which itself requires a biochemistry course. I think it's reasonable to assume the Peterson Academy students will have a far shallower understanding of this topic than those who take proper nutrition science courses. The next intro course is the first of the math courses, The Fundamentals of Mathematics, Algebra, by BYU's Robert Snellman. Presumably, the other math courses build on this one. First trigonometry, pre-calculus, and finally calculus. My main critique here, aside from the too short a course and lack of homework, is I've seen some schools, especially those with less of a STEM focus, start their math offerings pre-algebra. Yeah, somebody graduating with a bachelor's will probably have at least algebra under their belt, but that isn't always the case. Some schools you can swap in something like finance to meet the general math requirement, and 2, just because a student is graduating having gained competency in algebra doesn't mean that they came in with that competency. Like, even at my undergrad, which was a STEM school, if you didn't do well on the math placement test to figure out what class you should be going into, they had an intensive workshop if you weren't able to take algebra successfully. Like, they wanted to make sure that you had the basic arithmetic in place before throwing you into algebra at a STEM school. Emphasizing the STEM school part there, not trying to be elitist, just saying that these are STEM students who are generally more mathable than liberal arts students, just as a general stereotype, I guess, that even a STEM school is prioritizing making sure everybody's on the same footing coming into algebra. That's all I'm saying. Maybe this is something they'll add down the road, but right now, this seems like a gross oversight for an academy advertising itself to be for everyone. The next pair of intro courses are the space-related ones, care of cosmologist Brian Keating, Intro to Cosmology and Astronomy 101. These are lumped into physics because I've yet to see astro stuff not put there, and for good reason. It's physics at the massively large scale, and as such requires a rough understanding of physics and loads of math, even at the introductory level. Usually. In the Academy's current state, there's no prereqs, so competence with the bare minimum of just algebra isn't required for this class. I'm sure it's fine. It's not like students actually have to work problems with any formulas that are shown in class. It's all just conceptual mastery that matters in the end. Right? Companies that'll be hiring Peterson Academy grads? Of the 2 political science intro classes, only one is labeled as such. Introduction to Political Science by Eric Kaufman seems to cover the same ground as the 4 separate foundational courses at Georgetown, again raising the issue of likely lacking the depth of traditional courses. Amusingly, similar topics are covered by Dan Crenshaw's Unconventional Civics, although I'd guess that the content covered in Kaufman's intro course is probably the more thorough of the two, as it involves less eye-patch story time from this Texas congressional representative. For the 3 intro courses in psych, one isn't labeled as that again, and it's admittedly a bit of a stretch putting it here. I'm speaking of Peterson's own How to Live Your Life, something very roughly similar to classes I've seen as mandatory for incoming undergrads in an attempt to boost retention. Albeit those generally have less order, meaning, and Bible stories. There is also the Intro to Psychology course I previously reviewed. If you haven't watched that review yet, check it out. It's interesting and concerning how not representative of an intro psych class it was, managing to cover roughly half of the topics that should have been. If other intro classes are constructed similarly, last in the psych bin is Intro to Neuroscience, and I have concerns.
So the somatosensory cortex over there, the superior parietal lobule, worked in congruence. They worked together to create a sense of a whole self.
Brains, like kitties, are complicated things with lots of parts. And it can be a struggle to learn with the best instructor using the best textbook and bringing the clearest figures to lecture. Setting aside the instructor here, I should add that these courses do have recommended books for students to pick up through Amazon. They never come up in lecture, or the quizzes, or the tests, so they're optional, as are the quizzes and tests. And on the figures in lecture front,
So it turns out there's a region in the brain called the temporoparietal junction. I know I keep throwing names at you, but hopefully you'll get some of these. TPJ.
as I've said with the other Academy courses, this neuro course seems to somehow cover more topics than a traditional class, as I'm inferring from this intro neuro course from Harvard, but at significantly less depth. I'll hammer this home in the conclusion, but it seems like the Peterson Academy grads run the high risk of feeling like they know the material because they can recognize some of what they saw in lecture, but not really understand it at a useful level. Last of the intro courses is the Skepticism 101 course. Could be philosophy of science, could be psych. Either way, it's falling to the same overly broad but shallow problem of the rest. There's one last thing I want to mention before moving on, and that's the number of courses where at least one recommended book is by the instructor. Now, it's by no means happening in the majority of courses on the Peterson Academy, and it isn't unheard of for this to happen at traditional brick and mortar schools, but In my experience, those books tend to be more related to the course itself than, say, the cosmologist being ticked off about not getting the Nobel Prize, or the instructor's pet metabolic theory that may not really fully be backed by the science. Which brings us to the prospects of a Peterson Academy certificate or degree. Continuing in the FAQ, we come to the accreditation question. As was true last year, the Peterson Academy is not accredited, although they say they are still, quote, pursuing accreditation in a number of jurisdictions. However, we are not willing to compromise the technical merits, originality, or quality of our education to meet the requirements of any ideologically compromised expert body. We're pursuing accreditation, of course we are, but if we don't pass the necessary external review process, it's not a reflection of what we're doing in our courses and our instructional model. No. It's because the accreditation bodies have been ideologically captured by the woke DEI mind virus. They're likely a long way off from even really doing this process because the Academy's current offerings are insufficient to realistically meet the educational needs of their students in any significant capacity. There is an interesting wrinkle if we compared this phrasing to the pre-launch FAQ from a year ago. They have dropped the portion about the potential preferable alternative of partnering with companies directly. That, quote, one way or another, we will place our students first and foremost in the competitive employment marketplace. This balls-to-the-wall sentiment is just gone. Curious. But let's not get distracted. I can have certificate? Part of the promise of the Peterson Academy is some sort of tangible outcome to this whole anti-establishment educational endeavor. Don't forget, quote, higher education at 1% the price. And whew, they have drastically changed their stated plans here. Originally, it was going to be various certificates, quote, comparable to the granting of a traditional high-quality university degree, roughly from associates to bachelors. With the scattershot nature of how courses have been added, it's little wonder why they've seemingly abandoned this idea. But not at the same time. A feature that's coming soon, according to a recent email newsletter, is the curriculum planner, or builder. This plander, quote, gives you the power to visually plan your education across interests, difficulty levels, and disciplines. I haven't chopped off the figure. That's how it was sent. We'll come back to the Peterson Academy version in a sec, but first, this is a valid way to visually represent a degree process. For illustration purposes, this is a reconstruction of what my undergrad psychology bachelor's in science looked like. The orange boxes are the general requirements, blue boxes are psych degree specific, and the green boxes are the minor in biology I picked up along the way, as I just had to add one extra bio course on top of the required credit hours for psych. May as well. I should also clarify or mention that at this school, the psych major gets to double dip a bit, as there's also 6 credit hours of social science required that we just get to knock out in our major. Also, the bold text indicates a lab was associated with the class. Chem lab was a personal unfavorite. So, this reads from the top down. Need to take intro psych before research methods, which then opens up the rest of the psych classes. Bio 1 has to be taken before Bio 2, at which point the rest of the biology courses are fair game. Courses in college are structured to flow from one to the next, particularly at the lower levels. And I'm sorry to be spelling out what's probably common sense, but it's because they fucked it up, at least in this mock-up. Somehow, the clinical psychologist Peterson's Nietzsche course is considered the beginner Phil 101, which gets followed by both intermediates of the philosophy of ethinks, scratch that, ethics, and ancient philosophy. Those are capped off by the advanced Let's Read Jungian Symbols into All Things Christianity course by Peterson's friend and artist, Jonathan Pageau. What should be considered an intermediate psychology course, Introduction to Intelligence, is presumably Humanities 101. And once you're done learning about intelligence, the logical follow-up is, of course, political ideologies. Last one because I'm mad and it's egregious. Intro to Cosmology is Sci 101, which fine, fair enough. But that is somehow followed by Brain Metabolism and Mental Health, which of course you need to take before you have a chance of understanding Plato. I feel like it's a toss-up between carelessness and incompetence, but really...
¿Por qué no las dos?
My concluding thoughts on the Peterson Academy. Stealthily removing the fact promises about the certificates equivalent to traditional degrees kind of makes me question the point here. Like, you could view the Peterson Academy as an ideology-free, for some definitions of ideology and free, competitor to sites like CuriosityStream or Nebula. Just a paywalled site of curated content with a educational bent. But those sites aren't selling themselves as higher education at 1% the price, or that they're pursuing accreditation, or offering vague-ass certificates. No, for that we can head over to sites from universities, like Harvard or Stanford, to say nothing of all of the courses from companies like Coursera, Microsoft, Google, and so on. And you might say, especially if you're a lobster, "Ah, Cass, Dr. Eris, those don't have the theatrical experience of a class." The Peterson Academy white void of learning, where student actors sit in chairs too awkward for learning and listen to the broad but shallow class, never seeing the graphics and text that are added in post. You'd be correct in saying that, but in the worst way. These online learning classes have come a long way from when I dabbled a decade ago. These are filmed in actual classes with professors. Some, like this one from Stanford, are more basic. Some have better integration of the slides for online viewers, as in this video from MIT. But if this video from Harvard X is anything to go by, the bar has definitely been raised for how good these in-class productions can be. No awkward little chairs for these students. And if we go to Harvard's online learning site, we can see that their time estimates are more appropriate for students actually learning the material. This Introduction to Databases course is 7 weeks long, with an expected time commitment of 6 to 12 hours each week. There's actual assignments, not just some AI-generated quizzes and final test. And hey, look at that! It's fucking free! At the bottom are some suggested courses, and we can see they aren't all free. This lawyer-focused one is an eye-watering $2,000 even. But lawyers can quite possibly write this off as a business expense. If we look through some of the courses offered in areas of interest that overlap with the Peterson Academy, we can see some similar courses. There's one looking at the ethics of finance, free. Many religious-focused courses, some branching outside of Christianity, free. Math courses that also teach students how to do math in the free analysis language and attractive skill on that resume are. Courses are free. There's some on classical music, free. More science and culture courses, free for free. Shakespeare, free. But let's dip into one. This free US public policy course for a sec. And look at that. You can add a verified certificate for a fee. Yeah, that fee is a solid chunk of the yearly cost of the Peterson Academy, but it's coming from friggin' Harvard, not an unaccredited platform that has an eye patch representative telling you this info through the filter of his life experiences. I'm gonna be honest with you, dear viewer, they really took some of the wind out of my sails by ditching the degree certificates. I had this whole argument planned about how their random-ass courses were not going to be able to build to that promised degree equivalent because as the platform's structured now, there is no way they'll have things like the college writing courses or labs typical of traditional degrees. Things that aren't just there to meet accreditation requirements, but are critical in developing the skills someone should have when they graduate. It seems like these academy instructors are giving seminars on their favorite topics or books, not proper classes. And you'll be hard-pressed to find someone whose passion is English 101, college writing. But that's only part of the fundamental problem with the Peterson Academy. The glaring issue for me is the inadequacy of these courses. So typically colleges will have these things called challenge exams, which are like the final exam for a course that you can take for a fee. If you feel like you already have the skills and just want to move on without having to take the course again. I am confident that a Peterson Academy intro psych student would flunk an intro psych challenge exam at any college. The Peterson Academy intro psych course covered a small subset of everything that should be covered for these students to be able to progress to higher level psych courses, let alone just a basic understanding of psychology. Peterson Academy students aren't even being exposed to or shown to the full material they should be based on the course names they're buying, let alone going through the full developing competency process, from reading to the lectures to homework to tests. None of that. Just some lectures. Some. They can't be at the anemic 8 hours, give or take a couple hours, for each course. Traditional courses don't take the full semester, with however many in-class lecture hours each week, plus however many hours it takes to do the reading and other stuff for the class, because they're being inefficient with your time. Shit takes time to learn. I could continue to beat this educational horse until it's just a smear on the ground, so I'll stop. To conclude, it is this humble undergraduate educator, cognitive psychologist, YouTuber's opinion that the Peterson Academy is fundamentally unable to deliver on its educational promise. They will continue to build it, no doubt. There is a lot of money to be made here. And they've added some math courses, addressing one of my complaints from launch. However, that is a far cry from having the more developed undergraduate curriculum required for even just a psychology degree, the sort of default degree for a lot of people, even at the incredibly superficial level they're doing here. With the 2 brief courses and laughable competency testing, the Peterson Academy may become known as the place where you can graduate as an underskilled and overconfident lobster. Until next time.